We're here to talk about where can you find the strategic value of blockchain technology. And this has been something that, it's just very hard to ignore, right? Because whenever we're making major investments into technology, we want to understand where is the strategic value of whatever we're looking to do. And if you take a look at the poll for a second, right, I asked a question. I said, where do you sit in your organizational value chain? And we're going to take a deeper dive into value chain, and we'll break down what the value chain is all about. So the key is, as we're going to start to go into this webinar, it's important for you to kind of use your imagination and use some of the points that we're going to be talking about so that you can really pinpoint and identify where you sit within the organization. So as we put firm infrastructure, we'll get to what that is in a second. We put HR, technology development, procurement, inbound logistics, production of the logistics, and outbound logistics, sales and or marketing, and services. So we have actually on this webinar, we have someone from HR, we have someone from part of the technology development, we have a couple from sales or marketing. And then we also have someone from service. And we're going to now, right, we're going to, I don't mean to spoil the entire thing, but just to give a little taste of what we're talking about, we're going to identify some of the most common blockchain use case patterns that we see that are, written out there. And we're going to identify where they actually sit within your organizational, value chain. So by the end of this webinar, you should be able to leave with a pretty good understanding of, can blockchain be used in the particular, area of business that you're at. It's not necessarily we're not necessarily going to pinpoint what the use case is. We have options following the webinar for you to really, dive deep into, now that we've identified what area of the business this is, we have, certain offerings that we'll talk about that's going to help you really pinpoint it. But without further ado, I'm going to close this poll. Okay, thank you for sharing, and let's go ahead and dive into the content. So just 1 second, right? Just kind of introduce. I know that there's a couple familiar faces on the webinar. Thanks again for joining. For those that aren't too familiar with Envision Blockchain Solutions, we are a Microsoft partner, and we're really focused on blockchain agnostic solutions for today's business needs. Our mission and vision is to really drive blockchain adoption, and we believe that blockchain adoption is really going to happen through organizational transformation. We have a number of different services to really help out in whichever phase of this blockchain adoption that your organization is in. We'll quickly review this. We're not going to spend too much time on it. Essentially, right, if you are at the very beginning stage of trying to understand what blockchain is, we offer an immersion lab, which is as low as a 2-hour session to a half-day session where you can put your hands on existing blockchain technology that, smart contracts that are working. We help with blockchain education, blockchain 101, really is going to, drive this aha moment. We do use case workshops that help you, identify and pinpoint some of the requirements that's needed to shortlist the use cases that I was just explaining, and to also pinpoint what are the requirements that you needed to start developing and implementing this. So we provide solution deployments from POCs to full-scale deployments. As well as training and managed services. So to help you train on blockchain technology from development to after an implementation is complete, you're going to want to know how to manage it. So from an administrative perspective as well. And then also, this is something interesting, right? We also provide system integrations with different line of business applications, whether they're ERP systems or their CRM systems or their PLM systems. Integrating that with different AI, which we'll talk about, and IoT devices, which we'll also discuss. When you combine all these different pieces, this is really where you're going to get this power of transformation. So on top of all that, there's also this big data reporting element, and we'll touch upon that as well. but you'll see that with blockchain, there's, you know, data and blockchain and databases. It's all kind of similar, right? We're all swimming in the same pool. So we'll just save that for a little bit later in the webinar. So now we'll get into some of these industry accreditations. Again, we're not going to spend too much time on this one, but just to kind of highlight a couple of them, we're members of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. We are certified by the Linux Foundation for Blockchain for Business, which is where you're going to find your Hyperledger projects. And we're certified Microsoft professionals across the board with a couple different competencies. And the purpose of this slide is just to really showcase that while there are many different solutions out there in the market with regards to different blockchain frameworks, we've taken a blockchain framework approach so that there are certain benefits for implementing the Ethereum framework, and there's certain benefits for implementing Hyperledger Fabric frameworks. So, you know, and same with Corda, so on and so forth. So that's just something to consider when looking at different vendors. All right, let's get on to this main purpose of the presentation, right? And here, what we're really talking about is blockchain. Is it just hype, or is it the real deal? And you know, if we kind of take a look at, if we just take a little bit of a step back, it's kind of been a little bit over 10 years since Bitcoin was first introduced. And you know, there's many you know, conversations that are happening on, is Bitcoin blockchain? What is Bitcoin? You know, what is blockchain, right? You can kind of separate the two. But, you know, Bitcoin was really the first proven use case of blockchain technology. And you know, this technology that's associated together with Bitcoin, the blockchain technology, it's being used to make businesses, you know, across the board, across different industries, more efficient, more secure, streamlining processes. But right now, everyone's watching blockchain's distributed ledger technology and the way that it's changing the organizations and the way that we conduct our business transactions. So, you know, it's easy to get caught up in the hype of everything, right? Because you see it everywhere. You see it in the news, you see it on TV, you hear about it. You know, last year there was a lot of, you know, excitement. There was the you know, the cryptocurrency market that really got a lot of involvement and a lot of excitement. And you know, but it's kind of important for us to really understand what blockchain is, if we can kind of break down, you know, what it is and where it came from and where it's going. So, you know, I'm going to save everybody the blockchain 101 for those that are already familiar with blockchain. So you don't need this 101. For those that aren't too familiar with what blockchain is, this is one of the reasons why we offer this blockchain immersion session, so that we have a very, you know, in-depth way to explain what blockchain is with examples and so on and so forth. But we can keep it really simple, all right? So blockchain is a shared immutable ledger that facilitates the process of recording transactions and tracking assets in a business network. I mean, that couldn't be simpler, right? So if you were to break it down in 4 different parts, blockchain is a distributed ledger. You have nodes in the network that hold a copy of the ledger. Can't change whatever is in the ledger, can't change it, but everyone holds a copy of that, so everyone knows it to be true. And there's this chain of historical records, right? Hence the name blockchain. And so there's this chain of historical records that keep on, you know, adding on, and everything is kind of, you know, chronologically organized, and it's programmed via smart contracts. And we'll describe what smart contracts are once we get a little bit further into the presentation. But again, this is the simplest way to explain what blockchain is. Again, it's something that you're not really going to be able to put your hands on. Of course, there's applications that you can interact with blockchains, but essentially, right, like a database, you can't actually put your hands on a database. It's kind of the underlying technology. And when you match blockchain with some of the other systems, like we mentioned earlier, with these different LOB systems, these different line of business applications, you're really adding value onto that system, so that you're working in a very immutable way. So let's continue. So let's take again little step forward, and let's start to talk about the history of blockchain before we get into the use cases and where the strategic value is and all that, right? Let's just take a little step back, because the blockchain revolution is here, right? It's not going anywhere. People are investing money into it. Businesses are investing resources into it. So let's understand where we got to where we are. Again, this has been a little 10 years since Bitcoin was first introduced. And, we like to kind of start with the end in mind. So the end is that this is where we are right now, November 29th, 2018. We're right now in this phase where we're in the enterprise use case development and industrialization, right? So businesses, and this is why we're here, right? We're talking about the enterprise blockchain world. Businesses are utilizing blockchains, but let's see how we got there. So, at the very beginning, Satoshi Nakamoto released the Bitcoin white paper, right? So this was the first major thing that happened in this world of blockchain, right? It was this digital currency experiment, if you will, of how somebody could take some asset and transfer it to somebody else without an intermediary, right? Without anybody being in the middle. I think that was kind of the major purpose behind that, right? That there's no a third party, which is kind of slowing the process down, right? And that's kind of what the whole Bitcoin revolution really stood for. The second major thing that happened was kind of this separation of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, right? So, it's funny because, me personally, I got involved into blockchain through the cryptocurrency market. I mean, this happened, about 2.5 years ago. I got invited into the cryptocurrency market. Like, look, this is crazy, right? Things are booming. Get rich quick type of thing, right? But then when you kind of look deeper into the technology, right, you separate that cryptocurrency from blockchain. And it's very common in some of our early conversations with customers and clients and, colleagues, and, they say, oh, okay, well, is blockchain cryptocurrency? Well, this kind of is the major thing that happened in our industry, where we now can separate cryptocurrencies from blockchain. And when we take a look at this private blockchain consortiums, which is really which is being leveraged in enterprise use case, there is no cryptocurrency involved. There is no, coins per se. So, you're kind of using this distributed ledger technology of blockchain, and you really are, you can tokenize certain things, but they're not actually, cryptocurrencies where they could be traded for money and things like that, right? So this is kind of the second major thing: separation of blockchain and cryptocurrency. The third major thing that happened was this concept of smart contracts. So when smart contracts was introduced between Ethereum, and then Hyperledger came on the scene. I mean, they both kind of came around the same time. But then there were smart contracts that were introduced, and smart contracts really took this blockchain to the next level, right? Now what we're doing is we're saying, hey, this could be used for a lot more than just transferring, one asset to somewhere else. Now you can use this smart contract, which we're gonna dive into deeper conversation as to how smart contracts can be used and where. But essentially, they're saying, hey, let's involve business logic let's code our business logic into blockchain, so that who's ever participating in our network, they all know the rules of the game. We all know the rules of the business process, and thou shall not break the rules, right? Because it's hard coded into the network. So this is a very interesting concept. And then, of course, you know, throughout the next couple months and years, right now, there's this whole innovation where there's new frameworks that came onto the scene, different consensus algorithms that came onto the scene, and just the, you know, interoperability is something that's being considered. So, you know, there's rapid development which is happening, and that kind of drove the enterprises now to think about where their use case is and how they could use it. So, you know, one thing with blockchain use case analysis that we perform time and time again, essentially, right, these are the questions that we're hearing an organization ask, right? These are common questions that you should be asking, and, you know, we need to be answering, right? So the question is, right, when we're in our current, you know, current state is, can we reduce costs, right? The business wants to know, can we reduce costs? IT wants to know, if I implement something, can I reduce costs? And can we save time? And can we track assets? This is, you know, this is huge, right? Blockchain is all about tracking and reducing time and saving costs. And can we secure identities? And can we provide immutability, right? So, you know, can we provide this ledger that we can have multiple participants join, and they know that no one's going to go into that database and change the answer or change our, you know, what we like to call our golden sources, right? If the business depends on this kind of input, how do we make sure that it's not garbage in? And how do we make sure that once the information gets in, you know, that it's secure and, you know, and it doesn't change? So the output of a use case analysis is we go from can we to this is how, right? And one thing that we do want to be able to address in this webinar, it's, you know, this is how. So this is where and this is how. This is a very important concept that we really want to keep pushing for, so that once you leave the webinars, once you leave our sessions, once you leave the you know, the immersion sessions and the use case workshops, you have a clear understanding, and all the stakeholders involved understand how they are to move forward. Okay, so this is now gonna, we're breaking this webinar up in really two sections. The first section is business theory, right? We want to bring it back to a place where we can all agree that we understand. And, you know, we like to say the first rule about blockchain is you don't talk about blockchain, because, you know, it's kind of, the term blockchain is getting a little played out. When some folks hear blockchain, they start thinking of this Mount Everest that they need to climb. And sometimes, you know, let's just simplify it, right? So, for those that remember, where is Waldo, right? Where do you see your business use case? So one thing that I really, really want to urge everyone to do is, as I start to get into these next sections, start to think about where it is that you fit within these specific business processes, where you fit within this value chain. For those that are still trying to find Waldo, my wife found him in about 10 seconds. So if you can find him, I'll give you about 10 seconds right now. If you haven't found him, there's a spoiler alert. He's right there. So there you go. But the whole point is, right, as I go to the next stages over here, start to think about where you sit, because we're not going to be very specific on this webinar. We're going to be somewhat generic. There's a purpose for us to be generic, is we want you to start to think and question yourself, and then follow up with us so that we can have a one-on-one session and really help you pinpoint some of these points. So let's get into the meat and potatoes over here. So we are big fans of business in general, and any MBA student knows about these two concepts of business. The first one is going to be the Porter's generic competitive strategies. right? So these two concepts I'm going to talk about, they came from Michael Porter. For those that are unfamiliar with Michael Porter, I really urge you to read some of these books. They are business classics, if you will. So when we talk about the Porter's competitive strategies, what we're basically talking about is the firm's relative position to an industry really is going to determine the profitability over the long term, right? Whether you're above average or below industry average, right? So if I were to ask you, if you are in the automobile industry and and your profits are, let's say 15%, and then I ask you, but if you're in the retail industry, your profits are 20%, who's doing better? And that's not really easy to answer, and you can't even ask that because that's not apples to apples, right? So again, we're talking about industry averages because, and I'm just pulling these numbers out of thin air. 15% in one industry may be above average, where 20% in another industry is below average, right? So again, this is why we're choosing to be a little bit more generic over here, because everyone in here represents, I'm willing to bet a different industry, and we'll get to that. But essentially, right, is that there are two basic types of competitive advantage that you can have. You can have either this low cost or you can have differentiation, right? So the two basic types of competitive advantage, when you combine that with a different scope of activities, it really now leads to about 3 different strategies that you can have. And again, the whole point is I'm really urging you to think about where it is that you sit. Let me give you a couple of examples, right? So from a business perspective, you can either have the competitive advantage of being the cost leader, right? Being a cost leader. So in cost leadership, you really set out to be the low cost producer in the industry. You could achieve this so many different ways, right? You can have the pursuit of economies of scale. You can have proprietary technology, which allows you to do things cheaper than anybody else, right? Now we're understanding where blockchain is really making sense over here. Or you can have access to certain raw materials that nobody else can get. And you can make sure that you always, procure the cheapest materials. Again, so we put this example of Walmart because we all know that their sourcing is such that they always try to find the cheapest price for the customer, and that's their competitive advantage, right? If you want to achieve goods at a lower price, most likely you're going to be shopping at Walmart. Where on the other end of the spectrum, you have differentiation, where the firm really seeks to be unique, and you can now have this uniqueness and you can charge a premium price. So for example, Apple choose to be unique, right? Their computers, for example, are significantly more expensive than other manufacturers in the space because of the certain features that they implement. Now, what you can also do is you can also implement a focus strategy. Right. So the focus strategy, it allows you now to be a little bit more narrow with the scope. So, in cost focus, for example, Up and Up is a really great example. And I'm just sticking with the Walmart brand over here, is that they provide, cost focused cleaning goods. Right. So again, we really urge you to see where it is that you fit in your competitive advantage. Whereas, if you were to put a differentiation focus on this conversation, you may want to talk about the iPhone, right? The iPhone, the iPad, iPod, right? When that came out, that was different. It was a unique offering that the market just hasn't seen before. So therefore you can charge that premium because you're offering something that nobody else is offering, right? So again, just to kind of recap, is that with these competitive strategies, you have, industry-wide, or you have a market segmentation. So, this is super important because as we're going to start to get into this blockchain discussion, I'm just giving you a little bit of a, foreshadow over here, is essentially, right, you're going to want to know if you implement blockchain technology, will it help you achieve this above industry competitive advantage, right? If you know that you can use this immutability of blockchain, which I'm just excited. I'm just getting ahead of myself over here. We're going to discuss this in a little bit, but if you can use, immutability to source cheaper products or maybe better products, then you can charge more, because you have proof that this is where it's coming from. Or maybe you can provide your end users with a much more secure and identity protected type of solution. So therefore, they know that they can trust in this, and they know that it's secure. They know that if they use your messaging app, which is backed by blockchain technology, that they're not going to get their information, hacked, for example. Maybe they'll pay that premium. So again, we're not going to give you the answers to this test, because we all need to identify where you sit within your industry and with the competitive strategy that your organization has already started to develop, and let's see where this could fit, right? So we'll get into a little bit more of a discussion over the next couple slides. All right, value chain. So the value chain is another favorite of ours over here. The value chain that Michael Porter was talking about, it's really, if you take a step back and see what I'm about to share, you're essentially providing an organizational analysis, right? You're providing this assessment of what makes up the business and where the areas of value are within the business. So remember that poll question that I had asked everyone: where do you see that you sit within your organizational value chain? This was the section that I was talking about, right? So Michael Porter describes the business value chain really in two simple categories. You either have supporting activities or you have primary activities. Supporting activities is what supports the business, right? The primary activities are, how is the company making revenue? How is the company making money, right? So let's kind of get into this here. So with supporting activity, we have firm infrastructure. The firm infrastructure really concerns with the support activities with an organization that enables the day-to-day operations, right? This is where you see your daily operations. For example, this is where you have your line management. This is where you have your administrative handling and your financial management systems and things like that, right? So this is where you have the infrastructure of, for example, financial systems, right? That provides you that sort of value, right? You can't really operate a business without the right financial systems, right? Just for example, right? And you need to have this, administrative handling, and you need to be able to manage your line management, right? You have series of, you have, for example, employees that perform certain tasks. This is where you're going to see this kind of technology falling within the firm infrastructure. You also have human resource management, right? This includes support activities for the organization. And this is a really important element, right? Just because this is a supporting activity doesn't mean that it's not important. This is very important, right? You can't operate a business without having people, right? But when you have people, you're going to need to recruit them. You're going to need to train them. You need to pay them, and you're going to need to retain them. This is super important over here. The next concept is technology development. So within technology development, this is where you're going to see your, IT area. This is where you're going to really, develop your technological innovations and improvements and the development, right? This is where you're going to come up with ways to improve value through technological innovations. Obviously, blockchain makes sense to fit right within this area. Okay, so let's get into the next section, and it's a procurement. So now procurement, obviously, we've all dealt with procurement one way or another, right? So these are the areas that you're going to be, dealing with, for example, suppliers, agreements, services, and pricing, So again, you can see how the supporting activities now are going to, support the primary activities. where a primary activity of the business could be inbound logistics. This is where all the processes are involved with receiving and storing and internal distribution of really the raw materials or ingredients of whatever your product or service is, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be inbound logistics, right? So we have a proof of concept that we like to show that deals with ocean freight logistics, right? But it doesn't necessarily need to be, shipping. Well, it's a part of it, right? It's kind of across the entire industry, because let's say that you're sourcing in the Starbucks example, right, you're sourcing coffee or something like that, right? You still need to get the beans from the farm to the factory, right? The next section over here is production. So the production is where all the activities happen that convert all the inputs from the inbound logistics into a semi-finished or a finished product, right? So this is where you're going to get the value from creating whatever it is that your organization is essentially selling, right? The next concept is outbound logistics. So this is where you've taken the goods, you've manufactured the goods, you've provided some sort of production to it, building phones, putting the coffee beans, processing them, right? You're roasting them, you're shipping something. But then the outbound logistics this is where you really, putting the products and the services into the market and generating the customer relationships, right? So this is where you start this service to the customer. It could be, the storing on one end. It could be the distribution, but this is where you begin your relationship to the customer. Marketing and sales, we all know about marketing and sales. Essentially, this is where that customer relationship is solidified. And then, of course, we have service, where service is, not just after the sale where you're servicing, but, it's also in making sure that things are, refilled, that things keep on going, right? The customer care and the service aspect is incredibly important. So let's just take a look at this concept one step further. Okay, let's just go one step further. And one step further is now we have this value chain analysis between organizations. So for example, this is just one example of so many, right? You typically deal with the service of one company dealing with an inbound logistics of another company. So I'm trying to get everyone into the mindset of thinking where you are within your own organization, because one of the best benefits of implementing blockchain technology is when you can have more than one business involved with a network, right? So the value can be found in making these value chains work seamlessly between different companies. And let's get into a little bit more of, so right now we're going in a little bit deeper. So now let's discuss where business theory now meets blockchain, right? So this was close to 35 minutes of just a precursor. So before we get into where that actually meets, right, now let's take a second and let's describe, right? So this is not by any means limited to, right? This is just an example of some verticals and horizontals that's applicable to blockchain. I hope that we're meeting some of the verticals and the horizontals that are on this call. So for example, in the, insurance industry, some of the use cases applicable to blockchain involve, improving multi-party contracts or reducing disputes between shared data, streamlining the risk contract efficiency. All right, then we also see healthcare. Healthcare deals with patient databases and claims adjustments, and even goes as far as clinical trials provenance. You have finance. Finance deals with the streamlined payments processing and cross-border payments and consolidating financial ledgers. The transportation industry is interesting because now you can leverage blockchain for passenger identification and telemetry for shipments, vehicle history, and supply chain parts management. You have education, which is another great opportunity for blockchain, where you have the digitizing of academic credentials and repository of academic information. You also can provide this element of KYC, know your customer, when realistically in an education element, the customer is the student. So to know the student, to know their allergies, for example. You have energy, where you have this peer-to-peer energy transfer, really bypassing the public grids. When we get into the media industry, we really now are able, when we're implementing blockchain technology, to control the ownership rights and have this anti-piracy procedures, and again, quicker payment processing with rights management. Supply chain is a horizontal, if you will, that allows you to have this improvement of workflows and real-time visibility on the status of your shipments. And manufacturing, I mean, you can see, right, this list is going on, that blockchain is applicable to so many different industries. Manufacturing is that now you can see the asset life cycles and the history of data. You know, for example, you can see parts history, maintenance and repair history, damage events that happen, you know, so on and so forth. The food and beverage industry, the tracking and tracing of specific ingredients. Remember, I was given the example about the competitive advantage, right? If you can now source organic material and prove that this is organically, you know, organically grown, people pay more for this organic product. You know, when we're talking about the real estate industry, talking about the shared ledger of title records and the digitizing the entire process. How about even just providing up-to-date listing services, right? For those that have purchased a house before, how many times have you, you know, looked up a house on MLS or on Zillow or something like that? And, you know, you call the real estate agent, and by the time you call the real estate agent, you know, the house is already off the market. And in retail, of course, to understand and ensure the product authenticity and the fraud prevention, loyalty points, right? This is all part of, you know, what's applicable to blockchain. So when we dive into the way that blockchain is being used within different industries, we're seeing that there's similar patterns that are happening, right? So we can kind of talk about this use case categories in two different ways. And we got this, if you take a look at the link below, right? McKinsey about a year ago did a really excellent study about, you know, the strategic business value of blockchain, right? That this webinar was, you know, sort of following that case study. But what we did was we kind of took that and kind of changed it around a little bit, right? So we definitely agree that blockchain happens within record keeping, right? You have a static registry, you have identity management, and you have smart contracts. We're going to explain how smart contracts is applicable to record keeping. And also you have transactions, right? If your business is doing transactions, which every business has a way to transact, right? You're seeing that there's a dynamic registry, right? Things aren't just static, things are changing. And then you have a payment infrastructure. But what we see is that there's an overarching smart contract that allows both record keeping and transactions to happen. So let's dive into these, right? For the remainder of the time, let's go into these over here and let's discuss, right? So what do we mean when we talk about a static registry? And just keep in mind, remember, where's Waldo, right? Remember that picture of where's Waldo. So where do you sit within your business organization, within your value chain, that static registry happens, right? This is what we're asking everyone to think in the audience. So blockchain provides this distributed and immutable system for reference data. This allows businesses to rely on the immutability of previous transactions. And what we like to highlight is, you know, let's kind of go back to this Porter's value chain, right? And the way to read this is that this areas of gray, while we're not saying that static registry doesn't provide value, it just provides less value, right? So obviously, right, we're talking about static registry with human resource management, right? With recruiting, with training, with compensating, right? You want to be able to recruit people, but most likely, you know, the credentials that somebody has, it's not going to change. You have the static registry of, for example, medical, medical doctors, for example, is one example, or maybe someone graduated from this college, they have this diploma, right? That's a static record. For example, procurement, right? Procurement is a static registry, right? This company did X, Y, and Z. The pricing is X, Y, and Z. Might change, might not change, right? Inbound logistics. We're sourcing information from these particular farms, right? We're getting these parts. Those don't change. Now, there is an element of dynamic within there, but we're not really going to talk about that for this particular case, right? Sales and marketing, right? We're talking about GDPR, which is a huge, huge thing, which is happening in Europe. It's coming to the US. It's just a matter of time. Customer preferences, right? I do not want to get your emails. I do not want to share my data. That's going to be static. It could change. Therefore, it could be in both dynamic and static. But again, this is one example of where blockchain technology could provide value within your organization. Let's get to the next one with identity. So blockchain offers the guarantee of trust and security into digital identity systems. It enables the storage of sensitive personal data and provides a vital link to facilitate the transfer of assets, right? And we're talking about identity. We're literally talking about, people, right? So it provides this KYC, this trust. We've been involved in this use case where there needs to be identity integrated with a facial recognition system. So for example, someone looks into a camera, it identifies that this is Dan Norkin. Dan Norkin now goes and checks the blockchain on Dan Norkin's credentials. Face matches the specific inputs. Therefore, he's granted access to do what it's needed to be done, right? We're talking about these kind of identity things, or where someone walks into a place, they have certain preferences that are registered to the blockchain network. Therefore, that their preferences, maybe dietary restrictions, for example, are being now, broadcasted to whoever needs to see that. We're talking about this is the type of identity that it could provide. So we're talking about human resource management. Again, technology development all across the board with blockchain, of course, but procurement, right? Making sure that the right individuals can procure or do the right things. Production, making sure that the right individuals are actually able to get access into a specific area, so on and so forth. Talking about dynamic registry. So now this is an interesting part. Now we're talking about the transactions. Right? We're talking about transactions. So blockchain provides this distributed and immutable dynamic system for reference data. This is true, right? You have this system of reference data, but now you can also allow the business to leverage live updates and immutable data at the same time. And what we're seeing a lot with this is, for example, with the firm infrastructure now, right? Where we're talking about financial transactions. So showing the ownership of funds, right? Reconciliation purposes, what have you, obviously technology developments is one. Again, I said it's across the board, but now you're able to show provenance and transparency. You're able to show automation, right? So whoever has the ownership, right? We're talking about inbound logistics, the ownership of one material. And as it transfers ownership, as it passes hands, if you will, now this is going to update the registry for now who's owning it, right? This is a huge opportunity to help out and save time, be able to save cost, be able to provide this sort of transparency so that now you know when the next step is. So for example, if production needs to get ready, when the inbound logistics is coming in, now you have this sort of transparency in a real-time fashion. And it could provide this automation that triggers this next step of this outbound logistics. Payment infrastructure. I mean, right, we all went back in our history course just about 20 minutes ago. And the fact that data can't be altered and the network is distributed makes blockchain one of the most attractive technologies to use for payments and financial transactions, right? So you can leverage blockchain technology to help out with your payment infrastructure. And obviously, by the very nature of the payment infrastructure, now you have this, you have this opportunity in the firm infrastructure for your day-to-day handling, right? Certain things need to happen upon payment, right? When payment happens, then you trigger something else to happen. With financial management, I mean, this is the easiest shoe-in to make sense in. Talking about procurement as well, right? You can create within the smart contracts that we're going to get to next, and we can spend a second on that. Essentially, right, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, procurement is going to release funds upon this happening, right? Or this is written within your agreement of, within your smart contract. And we'll get to the smart contract as kind of the next segment. And then, of course, with the payment infrastructure, it really helps out with not just the inbound logistics, but also the outbound logistics, right? So if you're receiving goods, you most likely have to pay for those goods. And when you're sending those, goods out, you're most likely are going to get paid for that shipment coming out as well. And then from the service perspective, right, you do service, you're going to want to get paid for that. So again, this is providing this level of automation and trust and immutability across all payment infrastructure as possible. Okay, so let's take a second and let's slow down and let's talk about smart contracts. Because if you remember on the earlier slide, I was talking about that smart contracts is applicable to both record keeping and transactions as a whole. So let's discuss this for a second. So smart contracts, let's just define what a smart contract is. Because often the name smart contract kind of confuses some people, right? So let's just keep it simple. Smart contracts, it's a blockchain program. That's it. It's a program that you code business logic, and that is governed by the blockchain network, right? So if you're using, for example, Hyperledger Fabric or using Corda, it has different governance and different things that you could do than the Ethereum network, right? And vice versa. So let's just keep that in mind. And at the same time, with smart contracts, you can also automate business processes. You can exchange assets. You can verify documents. I mean, there's so many things that you could do with the implementation of smart contracts, and the smart contract is this intermediary. So if you're using other individuals, for example, or other services to provide this sort of action, well, you can kind of, automate this process. So it lends the question, do you really need anything else, or can you just get by with the smart contract? So when we talk about record keeping with the smart contract, see, once you develop the smart contract, right, once you codify your business logic, if you will, you then deploy it to, your blockchain network. That's a record that's being kept. It's immutable. It can't be changed unless you go ahead and, redeploy another one. So essentially what you're doing is you're providing this record of established business process logic that can't be changed. That's what's meant by the record keeping. But it does provide the sort of transactions and the sort of, way to automate certain processes at the same time. So naturally, right, you're going to find that implementation of smart contracts really helps out across the board, right? It really helps you out with your financial management, with your day-to-day line management, right? This person does this after this happens. That's what a smart contract is all about. It's like creating a rule in Outlook, right? If you get, if you get an email that has a subject line of this, then send it to that folder. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but sometimes it needs to be this way, right? So same thing with the rest of this Porter value chain, okay? So, we're coming up to the time where it's about time that we put it all together, right? So let's just take a high-level view of everything that we just discussed. Right. While we didn't go into the specifics, let's identify the specific use case. You identify the specific use case that you may have came into the room with. Right. Let's think that maybe you had a specific use case in mind, and now what I'm asking you to do is read this from left to right and top to bottom. Right. So let's First, now identify your vertical or horizontal, and I apologize if your vertical or horizontal isn't listed there, but essentially, pick where you are here. Now let's move to the middle column where you have the competitive advantage. Think about it. Are you a cost leader? Are you focused on differentiation? Are you the Walmart or are you the Apple? Are you the up and up or are you the iPhone? Think about where it is, because again, when you're implementing blockchain technology and your organization is focused on differentiation, you want to provide something that nobody else has and you can charge that premium. Well, maybe now that's a good example of where you need to implement blockchain technology, right? Or maybe if you are a cost leader, right? If you're providing services or products at a cheaper rate, maybe part of the reason that you can provide it at a inexpensive rate is because you've had certain technological developments that allow you to pass that value on to the customer, right? So just think about that. And then we move on to the third column where we have the value chain. Now that you've identified your industry and you've identified what your competitive advantage in your industry, now let's see where it is that you sit. Do you sit in the firm infrastructure? Are you a finance guy or girl? Are you, are you a part of HR where you need to, recruit the right candidates? Are you part of the technology development where all that you got to do is provide the best form of technology to support the primary activities? Or are you actually performing the primary activities? Are you in charge of the inbound logistics, or are you in charge of the sales and marketing and the, or the service? Think about that, because when we get to this bigger bucket of where blockchain is with regards to record keeping, the use case patterns, right, with record keeping or transactions, this is where you can, like I like to say, where the rubber meets the road, right? Where you can actually, put wherever that you are sitting in and your competitive advantage. And let's discuss what the specific use case is with regards to these patterns to either help you be different, to help you be unique, or to help you be able to save costs, save time, save money. But with regards to the strategic business value where you are, you're going to look at this value chain. And you're going to find out that I can provide value in our procurement department for implementing solution X. Or maybe I'm going to provide more value in the inbound logistics by sourcing just the best quality stuff, or from these particular regions of the world, or maybe this particular material. So we really urge you to put yourself into these situations and think about that. And obviously, what's next? After you've thought about that, maybe before you thought about that, maybe while you're thinking about that, we definitely do like to offer these next steps. So we are a Microsoft partner in the space, and because we're a Microsoft partner, we're able to now deploy these kind of pre-configured offerings, if you will, in the Microsoft Azure market space. Now, you don't necessarily need to be a Microsoft customer or an Azure customer to take advantage of these. Essentially, what we offer is a couple free offerings. We offer a couple paid for offerings, but they're heavily discounted. And what they are is, for example, you have your enterprise blockchain immersion half-day workshop. It's free. It gives you this ability to sit down with us for half a day where we go through the questions that you have. We have our pre-configured environment. We help you deploy your own blockchain network of your choice to your environment. That includes use case discussion so that you leave with a really good understanding of where you need to move to next. We also provide a discovery day, a one-day assessment. Again, it's complimentary, just to be able to help you understand this ultimate question that I hear from everyone: do I need blockchain? Right. So we go through a series of, stakeholder interviews, so on and so forth. So Enterprise Blockchain Accelerator, this is our 4-day proof of concept that basically looks at this Microsoft Azure blockchain workbench. And this is developed on the Ethereum proof of authority network. And in 4 days, we'll go through a real simple use case assessment, understand what that use case is, and help develop a proof of concept so that you can kind of, understand from a very simple perspective what this looks like. And then, of course, we have our blockchain deep dive 5-day assessment. And the 5-day assessment really takes a big deep dive into, you know, where blockchain can fit within your organization. What are the different businesses? It's kind of like what we discussed here in this webinar. But now we're actually going to put some more details and documents and technology and functional offerings really to documentation, so that before you invest into the development, before you invest into, you know, change management or to any sort of new processes, let's help identify exactly where it is. So, you know, I appreciate everyone for joining. We are just about at that 3 o'clock Eastern mark. So that's about it for the webinar. I really appreciate everyone joining. Thank you so much.